Good morning, folks. If you're just joining us, thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to wait 3 minutes, something like that, so others can join us as well. Have you had your first cup of coffee yet?
No, not yet.
I'm not a coffee drinker. It's against my political ideology.
Well, you're on my naughty list then.
I got up and exercised, so that's gonna have to count.
I wish I were, because my wife loves a cup of coffee in the morning, and I'd love to sort of have that experience with her. I was always told growing up it's an acquired taste, but I'm like, why would I put myself through that to acquire it? Get maybe on the other end, it's nice, but maybe one day.
You can always start,
Yeah.
If Holly tells you to do it, you're going to have to do it. You know that, right?
People told me I wouldn't get out of college without getting on the coffee. But I survived. Now the legislature is a different story, but
again, to folks who are just joining us, thank you for joining us, and good morning. We will give others maybe another 2 minutes or so to join us as well, and then we're going to start today's morning school.
Oh, shoot.
Again, good morning. We're waiting for maybe just a minute or less, and then we'll start the program. All right, I think we are going to start. Good morning, everybody. My name is Luigi Del Puerto. I'm the publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times, which covers state government and politics. And of course, if you don't have the Arizona Capital Times, please let me know. I'll get you squared away. We pride ourselves as an equal harassment newspaper, something like that. And I want to welcome you to today's morning scoop. As you know, the appropriations committees of the Arizona legislature yesterday approved a nearly $13 billion spending proposal that, among other things, cuts taxes to the tune of nearly $3 billion over 3 years. The philosophical arguments for or against cutting taxes are familiar. Critics say it would substantially shrink the state's revenue base on an ongoing basis, thereby hindering the state's ability to provide funding for critical services, while supporters say cutting taxes benefits the residents of the state and it positions Arizona as an economic hub by drawing in companies from higher tax states like California. But before that, I want to thank our sponsors this morning for engaging with us this way. Without their support, we would not be able to host and have a platform for public policy discussions such as the one we're having this morning. Our sponsors this morning are the Children's Action Alliance and the Arizona Center for Economic Progress. Children's Action Alliance is an independent voice that identifies and eliminates barriers to the well-being of children and families and creates opportunities through partnerships and policy solutions. The group seeks an Arizona state where all children and families thrive. Um, Also sponsoring this morning scoop is the Arizona Center for Economic Progress. The Arizona Center for Economic Progress is a leader in advancing policies that create fair tax codes, which raise the revenue needed to invest in education, affordable housing, healthcare, and infrastructure, and other supports needed to build thriving communities and better economic opportunities for all Arizonans. Again, thank you to the Children's Action Alliance and to the Arizona Center for Economic Progress for sponsoring today's morning scoop. We have a great panel this morning. Joining us is David Lujan, who is the president and CEO of Children's Action Alliance. David previously served as the director of the Arizona Center for Economic Progress. He's a former member of the state Senate and House of Representatives. He has worked in public policy in Arizona for 20 years. He served as an assistant attorney general, advising the School Facilities Board, legal counsel for the Arizona Senate, staff attorney for a nonprofit providing legal services to abused and neglected children, and as the public policy director for a national nonprofit organization advocating for early childhood education. David also served as chief administrator for Arizona State University's Preparatory Academy in Phoenix. The academy is a public charter school for preschool through 12th grade students. He earned his law degree at the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at ASU. David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Also joining us this morning is Mayor Christian Price, who has been a resident of Maricopa since early 2005. After moving from Chandler with his wife, they purchased their first home and started a family in the city. Mayor Price immediately got involved with his community by running for his HOA board of directors and was president for 6 years. He's very active in the community and was selected for Maricopa's first Board of Adjustments Commission, and he also served as the vice chair before resigning to run for mayor. For more than 15 years now, Mayor Price has been an entrepreneur and a small business owner. He's a partner of the Sierra Welfare Group, a financial advisory firm, a graduate of Northern Arizona University. He holds a Bachelor of the Arts degree in English Literature. Mayor Price has worked as a legislative analyst for the Arizona State House of Representatives and has firsthand knowledge of the legislative processes and procedures. Mayor Price, thank you for joining us.
For having me.
Also joining us this morning is Senator J.D. Messner, who represents Legislative District 17, which includes Chandler, Gilbert, and Sun Lakes. He also serves as chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee. He was elected to the Senate on November 6, 2018, after serving 8 years in the Arizona House of Representatives, including as Speaker of the House during his final term. Prior to running for office, Senator Messner spent 8 years working at the Arizona Senate, where he served as a policy advisor on issues ranging from education, transportation, and retirement to family services and government administration. He's a small business owner, investor, and consultant, and he also works as adjunct faculty where he teaches courses in political science for over a decade. Senator Messner holds a bachelor's degree in music and composition, as well as a master's degree in business and in public administration. And I always like to tell people that if you need somebody to play the piano at your wedding, Senator Messner is your guy. Senator Messner, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Also joining us this morning is Representative Reginald Bolding, who represents Legislative District 27. Did I get that right, Representative Bolding? Awesome. All right, perfect. He serves as House Minority Leader of the 55th Legislature, and his work in the legislature focuses on education, economic development, criminal justice, and veterans and civil rights. A first-generation college student, he graduated at the top of his class from the University of Cincinnati, where he earned an undergraduate degree in criminal justice and international security. He turned down a full-ride law school scholarship to become a special education teacher in South Phoenix. In 2010, he started a nonprofit organization to provide students from low-income communities access to internships and workforce development training at top companies and organizations in our state. Currently, he runs a civic engagement organization, the Arizona Coalition for Change, which empowers everyday citizens to grow their civic and political power to change their communities for the better. Representative Bolding, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And to our viewers and our listeners, I would encourage you to send in your questions via the Q&A box or the chat box. We will try to get to as many of them toward the end of the program. As I mentioned, the state legislature is now tackling a $13 billion spending program, and that includes a nearly $3 billion tax cut package over 3 years. And Senator Vince Leach said, and I quote, "Budgets are put together with compromises, so this must be a very good budget because we've got people mad on both sides." I want to start with Senator Messner. Are you mad with this budget? Where are you at on this proposal?
There are aspects of the budget that I like very much, like the overhaul to our tax code. And there are aspects that I could do without, including some of what's embedded in the tax policy that are kind of special carve-outs that I typically oppose. And maybe areas of spending I wouldn't have be quite as high. So I'm reserving judgment because I know there'll be changes even between now and when it gets to the floor, whenever that is, because that's a big question mark. I know there's going to be a push today, so we'll see. But yeah, I'm sort of in the middle. As I said,
On defense, and if you were to vote on the budget right now, would you be a yes or a no?
So I don't know that I can say definitively because I'm not even sure what's changed since it was introduced. So there are some pretty important pieces to me that aren't in the budget that I want to see there. So at the moment, I don't think folks should be counting on my vote, but obviously I want to continue having conversations with my colleagues over these policies, and I'd love to get to be a yes.
Representative Bolding, from your answer, are you mad with this budget proposal, as Senator Vince Leach alluded?
One thing that we've been trying to get to all session is bipartisanship. And I think the biggest bipartisanship that we see is a universal opposition to this flat tax. I mean, you have Republicans, Democrats, you have stakeholders all throughout, the state, cities, towns. People are quite frankly saying, legislature, what are you doing? Right now, the flat tax is short-sighted. We know the ultimate goal is to eventually get Arizona to a place where there is no income tax, and this is seen as a compromise. But with that compromise, what you're doing is you're making it more difficult for our cities, our towns, for funding proposals later down the line. So, am I mad about the budget? I think that I'm not excited about it. I don't think you'd find anyone who's excited about it. But hopefully, we can get to a place where there can be significant changes, as Mr. Messner alluded to. I always keep an open mind.
David, you've been a legislator, you've been an analyst in the state legislature. What is your feel for when they would actually get this budget out? I know there's a push to get it done, today and maybe tomorrow, something like that. But what is your sense of things?
Well, I think we still have a ways to go. It doesn't look like they've got the votes right now. It always seems like every year we have what I call the fake budget, which is a budget like we have right now that's going up, and they put it on the board and it doesn't get the votes needed, and then they kind of go back to the drawing board to make some changes to it. Seems like that's kind of where we're at. So, I'm not in the legislature anymore, but it seems like we've got a few more weeks, maybe a few more days, hopefully not weeks, before we get a budget deal.
Did you call it a fake budget? Is that the sort of the way things are run, something like that?
Yeah, I think it's the budget that doesn't really have the votes budget.
And Mayor Price, you also have been an analyst in the state legislature. From your end, what to you is the biggest concern in this budget proposal?
Well, certainly, I think that while I wasn't directly asked the question, am I mad or angry, I would say I'm scared. At the end of the day, there are quite a few things in this budget that are just absolutely detrimental to cities and towns, just like Representative Bolding had alluded to. And so, I think those are the things that we worry about. And while I completely understand that in governing, there are give and takes, and there's a little bit of making people happy, a little bit of making people unhappy, and I understand that. But I think that as we talk about compromise, we also have to talk about working together, and we got to have more dialogue on this. And I think that while I have seen it at the city level and I've seen it at the legislative level, they're very different ways of approaching it. And the way of approaching the state legislature is force the votes and make it happen. And I think in cities, we really try and take a more collaborative approach. And instead of going at things with the meat cleaver, we try and do it with the scalpel. And, preferably, I'd love to see that this budget ends up being a little more scalpel-esque and a little less meat cleaver.
Senator Messner, why don't you walk us through what is in this proposal and specifically what is in the tax package?
Boy, that could take some time. So in a nutshell, it's a $13 billion budget, which actually we've come a long way. So if you look back the Great Recession, it was about half that. So over the last decade or so, the budget is doubling to where it is today. We actually are looking at a roughly $4 billion surplus, of which about a third of it is projected to be ongoing. So not necessarily related to federal stimulus money. And so that's why you see a lot of interest in investing in certain areas. You have a lot of additional resources going to K-12 education, higher education, in particular in K-12 special education funding. You have a lot going towards paying down our debts that we incurred during the Great Recession. And then you absolutely do have interest in giving money back to the taxpayer in the form of a tax package and overhaul of our code. So a lot of different pieces in there, but the major pieces are in public safety and K-12. You have a lot of increases in salary, especially Department of Corrections, which many folks believe is long overdue, given the high turnover rate, et cetera. So, it really spans the spectrum, and it's a good investment in the economy overall, both from a tax package standpoint as well as certain areas. I know some of my colleagues want to scale back some of the spending in some places. So we'll see how that plays out. But in a nutshell, that's what you're looking at.
So this tax package, I think the main component, there are several big components of it, but one main component is that it reduces the individual income tax rate, phase it down over 3 years so that, by tax year 2023, we're looking at a 2.5% individual income tax rate. Representative Bolding, what do you make of the argument that the state has money, has surplus money? It's time to give back to the people of the state. This is their money to begin with, so let's cut their taxes. And also by cutting taxes, you position the state as an economic hub. It's a state that should attract more companies to either expand in Arizona or move to Arizona and flee, higher tax states, maybe a state like California.
We hear this argument every single year, right? It's not a new argument. Beginning of the year, you had, the governor and the legislature celebrating, Intel and other companies that are making investments here in Arizona when we don't have a flat tax, right? You see, the economy growing right now, and then we don't have a flat tax. So you see revenues that have gained, and we don't have a flat tax. So the argument that you need this in order to improve your economy is one that I would absolutely push back against. So that's the argument that's been used. The reality is that I hope that my Republican colleagues, when they pick up the microphone today, they thank President Biden for actually providing a number of dollars here in our state that's providing opportunities for even pieces of this budget to be deferred later down the line. But we have to make sure that we're not only looking short term, but long term as well. And we are literally handicapping former, legislators and governors in the future by making these direct tax cuts right now. And this is just, it's not only that they're large, they're inequitable. The fact of the matter that you would have a multimillionaire paying 1% of their general fund income tax to 1% of their tax to the general fund, but someone who makes, poverty wages, they could be paying 2.5% of their taxes to the general fund. Is totally inequitable. That is just something that I can't understand why lawmakers would think that's good policy.
Senator Messner, I see you responding to that, reacting to that. What are your thoughts, sir?
So thank you. A couple of things. Number one is a couple of years ago, we did a different, I don't know if I call it an overhaul, but we made some substantive changes to our tax code. One of which, the most meaningful of which, was we adjusted to the federal standard deduction, which essentially increased our standard deduction, which is essentially a zero bracket. So a certain amount of income you don't pay any taxes on. We increased it by like 2.5, 3 times what it was. So now you have a whole host of lower income people who aren't paying any taxes at all as a result of that. So you got to look at these things in conjunction. But in addition, my friend Mr. Bolding just ignores the surcharge on top of everything. So someone paying 4.5% of their income, regardless of where it's going, is paying nearly twice in percentage terms, let alone dollars, what everybody else is paying that doesn't have the Prop 208 surcharge added onto their tax bill. So with all due respect, that characterization doesn't reflect the reality of our tax code when you look at both the income tax as well as the surcharge.
To that point, Luigi, I mean, so what we say, so the 3.5% surcharge, it's a surcharge, right? Are those dollars going to the general fund? That's the question, because when I read this budget, what it says is that 1% of those individuals who make more than $500,000 a year as a couple, only 1% of their personal income taxes are going to the general fund. That's something that we can't argue about. That's in the policy. The 3.5%, that's from a proposition. So I mean, we can say you're paying 4.5%, but we're talking about general fund dollars, and what we're doing is we are subsidizing our most wealthiest Arizonans with the general fund.
With all due respect, there's no way it's subsidizing when they're paying almost twice what everyone. It doesn't matter whether it's general fund or a special fund. We have a lot of different funds. In fact, the general fund only reflects 1/3 of all the spending in the state. So to say that, well, it has to be a general fund thing, that's sort of creating a reality that doesn't have to play out where folks are spending in different areas of the state. When we look at education funding, look at their contribution to education funding. You can call it a surcharge, you can call it general fund, you can call it whatever you want. What it is how much money they are contributing to the system. And they are contributing far more than anyone else by magnitudes.
I want to bring in David, and just so we're on the same page here. We're talking about the Prop 208 surcharge approved by voters, last year, and it's a 3.5% surcharge on higher income earners in Arizona, and funding for that revenue from that surcharge then goes to education. David, your take.
Well, when we put together Prop 208, we could have said, well, we want to just make sure that more money from the general fund is going to pay for education. We didn't do that because we recognize that we have a revenue shortfall in the state in terms of we need more revenue. We wanted to raise more revenue to go into education. And that's what Prop 208 does. It raises an additional $940 million a year to go to education. And so I don't think the 1.7 million Arizonans who voted for Prop 208 intended for money to be taken out of the general fund to basically pay the tab of wealthy taxpayers in Arizona. And the flat tax is really just a massive tax giveaway to the rich. 53% of the tax cuts in this proposal will go to the top 1%. The bottom 80% of Arizonans will get just 8% of the tax cuts in this package. It will make our tax code even more regressive than what it already is. And then as you mentioned before, the biggest thing is it permanently reduces our revenue by $1.5 billion a year. Once the legislature passes a tax cut, and it only takes a simple majority of the legislature to pass a tax cut, it takes a 2/3 or supermajority of both chambers to reverse a tax cut later, to bring it back, something that's been virtually impossible to do. So that's what's the significance of this tax proposal. Once it gets into place, we never get that revenue back. And we miss the opportunities to invest in our schools, in higher education, in all the things that have been underfunded for more than 2 decades in Arizona.
Mayor Price, you're a small business owner, and you're also a partner in a financial advisory firm. I want to get your take, first of all, on Prop 208, and if you could tell us where you're at on Prop 208, And from your point of view, if you could talk about how it affects your city, maybe it doesn't, maybe it does not, but I want to get your view, sir.
Sure. Again, I don't know that I'll be able to get into quite the specifics that some of my colleagues here have done, arguing percentages and such, but, generally speaking, sure, I understand the law. The law was voted on by the populace, and the law says that they wanted to see an increase in revenue go to education. I have, as a very fast growing city, we're only a 17-year-old going on 18-year-old city this year. And so we literally are building everything from scratch, and what was farmland is now a quickly urbanizing city, and so therein lies the challenge when it comes to the need for infrastructure, additional schools. I have we're going to do 2,500 single family housing permits this year, and probably another 1,000 multifamily. They bring kids, they bring folks that need help. So the challenge is there going to be enough revenue from this budget to help support the educational component? And that's something that we're concerned about.
Resident Bolding, Senator Messner mentioned earlier that if you look at our budget from a decade ago, it's practically doubled, or almost doubled. And, it's not like the Republicans have started cutting taxes just in the last few years. They've been doing it for decades now. I remember when Janet Napolitano, a Democrat, was our governor, she struck a deal with Republicans to also cut taxes, I think to the tune of around 800 million, something like that. But what we've seen is the state's economy, actually gotten better over the years. And now we have state revenue that's double what we had, a decade ago, something like that. So when you argue that it chips away at a revenue base, but in fact, we're seeing a revenue grow. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, what we say is that you have, more people are moving to Arizona. You have the city of Phoenix, one of the fastest growing cities in the country, and Maricopa County, one of the fastest growing counties in the country, right? So that is something that should be applauded, right? And that's something that is important. The reality is while our census results came up, disappointing. We know there's still people here, and we know that there's still things that we need to fund. And just because, we believe right now that we're going to be at a position where there's going to be rainy days in the future, we have to make sure that we're prepared. As Arizona continues to grow, our needs will continue to grow. Infrastructure needs will continue to grow. Classroom spending needs to be secure. I mean, we have, KidsCare, something that I know we're going to talk a little bit about some of these items that are missing in the budget, but we have to make sure that we're a state that can provide an opportunity for our citizens to function. And by giving away the House today, we're really putting ourselves in a bad position tomorrow.
Senator J.D. Messner, I know you have to go and get to your car because Senator Messner is going to travel to get to an appointment he has at 9 a.m., but he will be rejoining us via a phone call. And I think, Senator Messner, you do have a big headset and you're not going to be texting, or you're going to be hands-free while you're driving.
That's right.
All right. So we will see you back in about 5 minutes or so, or less than 5 minutes or so. I want to shift the conversation to one of the things that's in this tax cut is the ability of the cities to get the shared revenue that they've always had. As you know, cities get about 15% of shared revenue. And by their estimate, this tax package is going to cost the city something to the effect of around $250 million a year. And I want to ask Mayor Price, from your point of view, how does this tax cut proposal affect your own city?
Great question. So, this is a tricky position to be in. I can talk about my city, and yet I'm kind of the city representative. I don't necessarily speak for all cities, but at the same time, cities and towns are all very different. And that's what's so magnificent about living in a different city in all different parts of the state. But we all have our challenges and we have our problems. And, as you just said, Luigi, that it's about 250. Our calculations actually take it to about 285, almost 300 million, based on some of the changes that have happened in the last few days. But 300 million to cities and towns is a huge hit And so, our counter proposal has been, hey, I understand you want to cut taxes. And again, I'm all for paying less in taxes. Who isn't, right? Nobody wants to pay more than they have to. But it's a law of diminishing returns that we have to be careful on. And I think that as we look at this and we say 300 million, there's a lot of little things in this budget that disenfranchise us more than just the money. I mean, as a financial advisor, I can talk about inflation. I can talk about, growth. I can talk about all the things that we should have this to supplant, money that we're going to need in order to supplant this. But just to my city alone, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 million. I've got about a $55 million general fund. What do I know as an absolute fact? Absolute fact, 65 to 75% of that general fund goes to police and fire just off the top every single year, just to keep them at par, right? That's not, overstaffing. That is keeping just the bare minimum, folks, so that response times are appropriate and that, your house isn't burning down because our guys are showing up there in 2 minutes or less, right? And so this is what we have to do as boots on the ground. So, I'm really coming at this from a nonpartisan perspective. I'm coming at it from the standpoint of how does this affect us? And again, if I'm a microcosm of what every other city in town is going to go through, I have a real issue when the budget says that we can't then touch our police from a reduction standpoint, or we don't get funding in the makeup of this budget later on in their proposal that is a pseudo proposal to hold us harmless, which is only 2 years. And that's a real issue. So I can go into numbers. I can go into populations increases. We've done some of the numbers. In order for us to make up that money, we would literally have to double in population the next year in order to make up that difference in what the cut would be to us. If we follow the other philosophy or advice that says, hey, well, you're going to make it up on the recreational marijuana side. Well, we don't have any recreational marijuana dispensaries in Maricopa. I don't know if we'll get any or not. But furthermore, we'd have to generate $25 million in recreational marijuana sales just to supplant the amount of money that's being cut for us. So they're just simply unrealistic. And so now I have to determine, where do I make those cuts? And if I take those cuts out of economic development, well, then that's literally biting the hand that feeds us in the philosophy that we're trying to take in the approach of the budget, which is we're not growing the base that we need to generate more tax revenue. And I understand trickle-down economics, and I do believe that they work in many cases, but I just have a hard time, again, taking the meat cleaver to it rather than saying, wait a second, it also seems disproportionate that now I'd have to make major cuts to fire because I can't touch police, even though police gets half of the 75% of my budget. So these are the challenges that I'm looking at when I look at this budget and go, I'm not sure how we're going to do this. So I'm scared.
Thank you, Mayor Price. In fact, I want to go back to Prop 208 because I did miss asking David a question. David, the Arizona Capital Times had a story yesterday saying that organizers behind Prop 208, the coalition that pushed for the this tax increase on higher income earners in Arizona, that you are considering a referendum on this tax package or the budget bill, effectively. Assuming that it passes. Can you tell us about what you're planning to do?
Well, we're just looking right now. When you have a tax proposal that is a massive tax giveaway for the rich that can really decimate Arizona's future, I think you have to look at all options, and that's what we're doing. And and I think it would be a much broader group than just the education coalition. I think since this has gone out, there's a lot of people that have expressed an interest, because when you have a tax proposal that leaves 80% of Arizona behind, there's a lot of people that are going to be interested in trying to reverse this. And so, it's an option. It requires a lot of signatures in 90 days after the legislative session ends. But I think our coalition has shown we've been able to do it twice in very similar circumstances. In 2018, we were able to get more than double the signatures that are required for a referendum in the same amount of time. Last year, during the middle of the pandemic, we were able to get signatures, and some of the other groups that are interested in participating in this have also proven that they can do this. So we're looking at it as an option, and we'll see what happens.
Senator Messner, are you back with us, sir?
I am.
So I want to get your take on the potential referendum on the tax package, assuming it passes. As David Lujan mentioned, the organizers behind Prop 208 have actually successfully put to a referendum laws that you have passed. Are you potentially deterred by that possibility?
No, for a couple of reasons.
if it goes to the ballot, I think we'd make a strong case that having wealthier people with an effective tax rate that's nearly twice what everybody else's is it's hard to make the case that this is a giveaway to them under that scenario. But in addition, if it passes, if we actually are successful, and I think we would be, some polling we've done looking at the question without sort of any attempts to influence the answer by adding, someone's views, shows it's overwhelmingly popular to allow folks, families, to keep more of their own income across the income spectrum. But if it goes to the ballot and it passes, it'll be voter protected. So we'll have a single rate that's voter protected. I doubt that's what my friend Mr. Lujan would want, but that's sort of the higher stakes aspect to, if you do refer it to the ballot, then that single rate will be voter protected. And there's a certain benefit to that. I don't like having the legislature's hands tied, especially on the tax code, because, conformity happens, changes happen at the federal level, we conform to those changes. And so if your hands are tied, it can make things more complicated. But I suppose that would be the silver lining if we're successful at the ballot.
Now that is a legal theory, right?
I don't think that one's a legal theory. I think the legal theory would be if it fails at the ballot, then someone would try to say, I've heard people say, well, if it fails, you can never touch it again. I don't think that's a practical understanding of Article 4 of the Constitution. But I do think that, that legal theory has been put forward, but I don't believe it's legal theory that if it passes at the ballot, anything passed by the voters, whether it was intended to go to the voters or was passed, as a referendum, is voter protected.
Representative Bolding, go ahead, sir.
I was just going to say, I think, it's a big miss to think that this is a popular thing with Arizona voters. When Arizona voters see that this is a tax cut for the rich, and that it's going to have such huge negative impacts on cities and towns and the services that our communities rely on a day-to-day basis, this is hugely unpopular. And I would be very wary if I was a legislator voting for this package and knowing that in 2022, that this is going to be basically a referendum on their vote. I would be very scared about that. And I also want to just clear up something that I heard today, and we heard so much yesterday during the legislative hearings, that Prop 208 somehow gives Arizona one of the highest income tax rates in the country. And that is simply not true. Even for the people that are in the top 1%, they still pay a lower effective tax rate than the national average with the passage of Prop 208. And we were talking earlier about the economic impacts. Prop 208 passed 7 months ago. And in the 7 months that Prop 208 has passed, we have already seen economic development coming into the state. The Wall Street Journal just last week did a story on Phoenix and saying that Phoenix is seeing a surge in luxury home buying from out-of-state buyers in just the last few months. And so I think what we're seeing is just more of the continuation of what we saw in the campaign last year, of these sky is falling claims that Prop 208 is somehow going to destroy our economy. And just like they claimed with the minimum wage, that was not true. And so it's time, instead of doing tax cuts as our go-to economic policy, to look at other strategies like investing in education from early childhood to post-secondary. And tax cuts, we've done that every year but two for the last 30 years. And revenues have not been going up. They've been going up because our population has been increasing, but on a per capita basis, since we've been cutting taxes every year, revenues have been steadily declining for the last 3 decades. And so that's the problem.
Mayor Price, I want to ask you a question, sir. Is it clear to you, or do you agree with the argument that the reason why we're seeing this flat tax proposal right now is really a response, a reaction to Prop 208, and therefore it is meant to counteract the effects of Prop 208?
That's a great question. I don't know if I'm the right one to ask, but certainly I can see both sides of the issue. I can see those that have philosophical strengths in believing that we should have the lowest tax possible, and so everybody's going to do what they can do to undermine that in some respects, and others that say, hey, this we shouldn't touch this. So I just see that at the end of the day, what's important is revenue. right? If I'm a small business, revenue is important to me. If I am a company, revenue is important to me. If I am a person at my table, in my own home, dealing with my checking account, my income is important to me. So, I have to see this as, how do we provide the goods and services that we have promised to the people and that they expect and demand, yet simultaneously, live within the flow of what the feel of what is the role of government in providing a balanced approach to not overtaxing, but at the same time, not providing enough revenue so that we can do what we're supposed to do. And when, Luigi, you and I were talking earlier about the city of Maricopa, that is something that if we can be kind of an anecdote or a microcosm of what every other location in the state is going through. Look, we understand for the last 6 to 10 years, we have worked diligently to cut our taxes, but we also continue to grow, just like David Lujan was saying. And yet at the same time, we're not doing it with a meat cleaver. We're finding efficiencies inside our own government and stopping extra spending that doesn't need to be there. But we also at the same time take a balanced approach to investment. We invest in ourselves, we invest in infrastructure. And so we spend where we need to. You've heard the old phrase, it takes money to make money. Well, that's the fact, is that we're spending at the same time while cutting taxes and finding efficiencies. And I think that, if I can offer my own 2 cents of advice to our state, if we could do the same thing there, then we could take a measured approach to doing this, and we could find a lot better way than to really make a ton of people angry or a ton of people happy, and really accomplish more and get more bang for our buck. That's my personal opinion.
Representative Bolding, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I mean, to jump into your question, is it a response to Prop 208? I think yes, and right. Yeah, it absolutely is a response to 208. But I think it was extremely telling during, House, caucus, a majority caucus meeting yesterday. And it was quite frank. What was said was that, the ultimate goal is to get Arizona at 0% income tax. And as the member said, I was here when Republicans had a super majority. We would have never thought that there would be a 1 vote difference in the House, a 1 vote difference in the Senate. And if we don't do this now, we may never get an opportunity to do it. So it's political, right? This is all about politics. This is all about recognizing that if this flat tax is implemented today, it becomes extremely difficult to get a supermajority to overturn it. And that's what is completely about right now. And it's about, wanting to be seen as a state that has made massive tax cuts, which we've seen this story before, that what it can lead to is we'll find ourselves in a position where we're still struggling to actually fill the gaps that we have. So we have to pause for a second and look at where we're at this place in time. What's the best policy? Again, this is universally opposed. Republicans and Democrats, again, 80% of Arizonans would be left behind by this flat tax. We need to put it on the shelf and look at a new proposal.
Representative Messner, I want to ask you, sir, to respond to Representative Bolding's assertion that, well, first of all, you're trying to do this right now because you're probably looking at a future in which the Democrats would have the majority in the state legislature.
So I don't know what the future holds. We've had a lot of growth in this state, so obviously that has had an impact on the politics. The fact that we've had so much growth, I think, is a testament to the policies we put in place over the last several years. But the simple reality as to why we're doing this now is because we can afford to do it now. Many of us have been trying to work in this direction for years. Many of us were hoping for this moment. We've never had a $4 billion surplus. One of the challenges with simplifying the tax code, especially if you're going to do like a flat rate, is it often, at least other versions that have been tried in the past, creates a winners and losers problem. This tax package is only winners. Everybody benefits, but that makes it very expensive. Fortunately, because of the revenue that we're seeing, it makes it possible. If it weren't for that, then this would be like any other year in the past. It's only because of the exorbitant amount of revenue that we're seeing, the economic development, the explosive job creation in the state, even within the midst of the pandemic, that has set us up for this moment. And because we've been laying the groundwork for so long, every year that I've been there, I've been pushing for this, trying, running various models to see how we could achieve this. And it is now possible because of the economic and revenue condition we see ourselves in.
David, I think you were shaking your head there for a second.
Well, I just want to address we can do this tax cut because we can afford it. Let me just talk about, we are 48th in the country in per pupil funding for public education. No state in the country has cut more from our higher education institutions over the past decade than Arizona. We have some of the fastest growing tuition rates in the country. We have the 4th lowest rate of children's health care coverage in the country because we have eligibility levels for KidsCare so low. We have an emerging affordable housing crisis because we have completely depleted the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and have never restored it. We have some of the lowest childcare subsidy rates in the country. We have a K-12 rollover that we did a decade ago that we never paid back, and other state debts. So to say that we can afford to give a massive tax giveaway at a time when so many Arizonans are struggling, and when we have done such a poor job of reinvesting. Every year, organizations like mine go to the state capitol and we plead for peanuts, for more investments, to have just a few more dollars. And every year it's, well, we don't have the revenue to do it. We don't have the revenue, sorry, not this year. This year, we have the biggest revenue surplus in state history. We don't have to spend all of it. It can be a mix, but we're not doing anywhere near the level of investments that are needed to help sustain a growing economy in Arizona and to help our communities thrive. And so that's what I think so many advocates are so fed up with, is we're not investing in people. We're investing in the rich taxpayers, and we're giving them basically tax giveaways.
I want to
Yeah, but really quick to that point, the reality is, I know that it's been said a couple of times, we have a $4 billion surplus, rainy day fund. Just put it in the simplest of terms. We all have a household, we run our household. If you have a bank account that has hundreds of thousands of dollars in there, but you're about to be evicted from your home, that's nothing to celebrate, right? Yes, you have money in your account, but you're not paying your bills, you're not investing. So we really have to reframe this idea that since we have so much revenue, that means we're in a great place to get rid of these dollars. Anyone in this situation who has a mortgage and you're behind on your mortgage and you're a payment away from being on the doorsteps and you have the money to pay it, to actually pay it off, that's not a good position or something to celebrate at all.
I want to shift to Mayor Price. I asked you about the impact on the cities of this flat tax proposal, cutting down income taxes over the next 3 years. The league is proposing that the state permanently increase its shared revenue, or the city's shared revenue, to 18.9%, almost 19%. What does that do to a city like yours?
Yeah, so by increasing that percentage, it would offset the decreases that happen, and therefore essentially hold us harmless. Or there'd be some harm, but it would be a lot less than the $300 million that's being proposed. And I think that's their biggest issue, is that one of the challenges that we see in the proposal right now, as the budget as it stands today, is that they say, well, we're going to mark you based on the sales of today and the income and the taxes, et cetera. And then we're going to give that to you over a 2-year period, depending on what the difference is, and we'll hold you harmless that way. But then when you get to year 3, there's just going to be this fiscal cliff, and good luck, and we'll see you later. And I'm just not sure that's the appropriate way to go about it. I think that, again, with more dialogue, with more working together, and again, our counter proposal, which has been studied by Jim Rounds, who's a well-known, renowned economist, and he has gone through and done the numbers, and he's saying, look, at this 1.9 billion and ultimately the approximate 300 million cut to cities and towns, you've got to increase that amount. Otherwise, that 15 to 19%. Otherwise, it's just going to be a fiscal cliff that comes. And what does that mean for me? What does that mean for every city and town? Well, it means that every service that every person relies on, from filling potholes and roadway issues and parks and all the things, libraries and police and fire and all the things that people rely on, because that's what cities and towns provide. The state doesn't provide that, the cities and towns do, that they're simply not going to have the money for it. And if that's what we want to do as a state, then so be it. But now we have to make the hard decisions at the local level on what's going to go bye-bye. And it's just a fact of the matter that it's going to have to.
Luigi,
yeah.
I want to respond to my friend Mayor Price here. So last night I was at a district meeting where I was hearing about the city of Chandler is actually looking at cutting taxes itself. And you are starting to hear some of these conversations in certain municipalities because many municipalities are sitting on the equivalent type of surplus that the state is sitting on. Now they're going to say this is one time, I get it, but some of it is ongoing. And even if cities decided, boy, we can't do this reduction in state shared revenue, which by the way, there's always wild fluctuations in state shared revenue with the economy. It's not like it's this steady stream of a set amount. There's always fluctuation. But even if they decided, yeah, we can't afford one less dollar under the circumstances, which most of us are pretty skeptical is the reality right now. They can adjust not just by cutting services. I certainly wouldn't advocate cutting public safety, police, or fire, but they can increase the revenue sources, whether it be sales tax or property tax. Now, I'm not advocating that they should do that, but even if they had to do that, even if that was where they decided to go, the taxpayer in Arizona would be far better off having a $1.5 billion tax cut, even if in certain scattered places around the state, there was a partial offset, because they felt they had to increase sales tax, some nominal amount, or property taxes. And I feel like that's lost. Instead, we're getting blamed because, they may find themselves in whatever situation, as if the city condition from one to the next of the 90 plus we have is not also a function of the decisions they've made locally.
Mayor Price, you want to answer that really briefly, sir?
Sure. Yeah. And again, I understand the senator's position, but the fact of the matter is it's simply not true. At least not in totality. It's true. Things do fluctuate. And just like the state budget fluctuates on a regular basis, those things are indeed. But let's be honest here. I mean, this is a classic example of the legislature pushing it to the cities and towns to say, you be the bad guys. We're going to take it away from you in an unfunded mandate. And then you be the bad guys and you raise your rates because we're just going to do this at the state level and everybody else is going to have to go along with it. The state hates it when the feds do it to them and then they turn around and do it to us. So, again, I understand that I'm all for, paying less in taxes. I really want to clarify that. I absolutely think that's a good thing. But in this particular case, I go back to my Bible studies and I remember Joseph of Egypt, and there were 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. And I'm a financial advisor by trade. It's what I do for a living. And there is something called economic cycles. And where there is good, there is bad. And where there is bad, there is good. And it's coming around again. And so at some point we have to say to ourselves, is it best to cut the rate so that we can't get ourselves back out of it when we find ourselves in a bind? Or would it be better to give a rebate? Therefore we can give a one-time rebate to people and then we can adjust that on a year-by-year basis as needed. I just think there's a better way to do this, but primarily at the same time, invest in yourself. And when you talk about property taxes, that might work for some cities, but a lot of cities are already up against the 1% cap. And in my case, that's absolutely true, but it's that way because my voters said so. My voters said, we want a public safety tax. And so I have money that I can't collect because we're at the 1%. Now, again, we keep pushing it down, but we find efficiencies internally in the millions of dollars so that we can offset those while still cutting taxes with a scalpel. And so again, it's not about the meat cleaver philosophy. It's about how to do this in a balanced way that still provides the goods and services while providing for the fact that things are going to fluctuate on a year-by-year basis.
There are several good things in this proposal, what many would consider good things in this proposal for children. K-12 education funding is going to go up. Among other things, the state is they've been starting to pay the rollover payment that David Lujan had mentioned earlier. I think there's $30 million in this budget for that. There are a couple other things for kindergarten entry assessment, dyslexia training, teacher reading, and the big ones include $50 million for special education. And of course, district additional assistance and charter additional assistance are also going to be fully restored, by this proposal as well. Not in this proposal, however, is KidsCare funding. David Lujan, sir, can you talk about that?
Yeah, so Arizona, as I mentioned before, has the 4th lowest rate of children's health care coverage. We could improve upon that by expanding the eligibility limits for KidsCare in Arizona. It takes a relatively small state investment of about $12 million to then draw down federal funds to be able to do this. It is just baffling to me and how when we have the largest state revenue surplus, as we mentioned earlier, we can't find it upon ourselves to give an additional 12 million to expand health insurance coverage for low-income children while we're instead doing these big tax giveaways to the rich. And so that's just one of just what I think are so many missed opportunities that exist in this budget. I saw yesterday in the budget discussions, they were saying that the House and the Senate, in addition to the regular ongoing funding that the legislative chambers get, the House and the Senate are going to get an additional $5 million each, so a total of $10 million to do, I don't know, renovations to their buildings. And it just, that struck me as that's about how much we need to expand KidsCare coverage, you know, and so it's budgets are about priorities. It's about what you value. And it seems like so much of what we should be valuing is left out of this budget. And that's what concerns us so much about the missed opportunities that we're seeing.
Thank you, David. I want to make sure I actually said it correctly. There's funding for KidsCare in this budget. What David and others are asking for, an expansion, a $12 million spending in addition to what we already have in the budget to draw down federal funding. Senator Messner, is this feasible, and why is it not feasible if it's not?
So Luigi, I'm glad you clarified that there is funding for KidsCare. Obviously, how far you take it is always going to be a policy debate. I've not been part of the inner conversations of the budget negotiations to know sort of what the thinking was on KidsCare. But yes, there is funding in the budget for KidsCare. It's not expanded. But we have, as you outlined, frankly, pretty well, these different areas of the budget where we have invested. And there is federal money as well. You know, we don't have as much discretion over that. Frankly, the governor has more, but there is additional resources going to kids to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars for other things. A lot of it is in education, whether, you know, be funding parity issues or CTED funding. That is a general fund issue, and that's something that I pushed for and got into the budget. So there are other areas too. It's easy to look at a single issue in a vacuum and say, well, you should definitely do that. You obviously are not making decisions in a vacuum. You are looking at the totality of the picture, and we are investing both in various aspects of state government, including areas that help kids, areas that keep people safe, areas of education, K-12 and higher ed. And yes, we are also returning money to the taxpayer.
Representative Bolding, I want to get your take on that one. It's as David mentions, a matter of priority. Senator Messner argued that you have to look at the whole budget, not just specific spending items. But what about KidsCare expansion?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why it shouldn't be in there. I mean, any explanation of the fact that we can't find $12.5 million to fund KidsCare is just basically saying that we don't want to invest in our kids. I mean, you know, there's money in here for David alluded to the resources that we're going to be given to the state, but then you also have funding in here that totally could be just diminished, that we could take other places that we're getting to bring along other folks to be part of this budget. And the reality is that as a state, we have to make sure that we are investing in our kids, we're investing in our teachers, we're investing and in a lot of different places. The resources that you talked about specifically regarding education, the state's not investing in those. So I just want to be really clear. The state is not making investments. The state is relying on federal resources to actually fund some of those Department of Education programs. So when you talk about literacy coaches, kinder entry assessment, dyslexia, teacher reading exam, JAG program, that's not the state investment. That's Biden. That's Biden, what we call Biden bucks being invested here in the state. And the governor could choose to utilize those dollars in these programs, or he could choose not to. So there is no state commitment. So I think it would be disingenuous to say that the state is actually making a deep investment in education.
Thank you for that. I want to go to the audience questions. There's a lot of them. Here's one. I think Senator Messner may want to answer this. What will be the tax impact if the flat tax is enacted and then the state Supreme Court strikes down Prop 208? will the tax liability for those top earners remain at 1% while everybody else pays 2.5%?
No, there's no 1%. There's no 1% anywhere. All it's just establishing is the cap. And folks back into the 1% because, well, they got to pay the surcharge, which, by the way, the word surcharge is just another word for tax. It's clever because maybe it's lost on people, but there's literally zero difference between the two. So if the court strikes down Prop 208, which I think is a distinct possibility, but who knows when or if that will happen, then it would just be the 2.5% rate. Having an aggregate cap, since you won't have a surcharge at that point, there won't be anything above 2.5% to get you to that cap. But there is no 1% established. I know, again, it's a great way of sort of describing this issue to try to win over folks in opposition to it. But it's a 2.5% rate that applies to everybody.
I think Mayor Price can answer this question. Has there been a study that the public can review on the changes that all can expect on this major shift to the state tax structure? And I think you mentioned Jim Round's study, sir.
Yeah, so Jim Rounds has done a lot of investigation into this, and that's where our information is coming from in a lot of respects. There are others that have done it as well, but again, I think it's the overall hit that we take, and I want to be clear that I don't want to be seen as someone who's unwilling to do their fair share to some extent, right? I mean, we certainly understand that if the state's philosophy is to go a certain way, that we certainly want to be a part of it to the extent in which we can help. But helping is an interesting thing, because when I think about it, I think that a fiscal cliff is not helping or being helped. That's just detrimental. And so I kind of think Senator Messner, respectfully, he said, hey, you have options raising the property tax or the sales tax. Well, those are so defined and so set in stone basically by what the populace will allow, that it's really not an option. I think of Winston Churchill's quote says, give us the tools and we'll finish the job. Well, then I say to the state legislature, give us an alternate method by which we can, have some additional revenue. The state did it to themselves just now in the licensing and the gambling. They're getting an extra $300 million. So they might be dropping this $1.9 billion, but they're certainly offsetting it by $300 million. Give us the tools to do the same, and I'm sure we'll find a way to do it.
And I think we have room for just one question, and this is a question for David. David, can you address the fact that a temporary surplus is being addressed with a permanent tax cut, and how that could challenge the state in future years?
I'll give you a couple of examples. Prop 123, which the voters passed back in 2016, the revenue from that goes away in 2025. So that's a $251 million fiscal cliff that's coming down the road. The state is also currently in court with school districts over school funding for facilities and renovations. The state has shorted school districts by more than $3 billion since 2005 on school funding for renovations. That bill is going to be coming due soon as well. So those are two examples of increased needs that we're going to have. And if we're giving the tax dollars away in these one-time dollars, we don't know whether they're going to last. We can be in a real fiscal bind down the road if we're doing these big tax cuts now.
And with that, I think that's a good place to end. Mayor Price, David, Representative Bolding, Senator Messner, thank you again for your time, sir. I really appreciate your being so generous with your time. To our viewers and to our listeners, thank you so much. I hope that you've learned something from this morning scoop. And to the Children's Action Alliance and the Arizona Center for Economic Progress, thank you for your sponsorship this morning. And with that, bye for now, and I'll see you around.
Thank you.